So, ladies and gentlemen, our podcast today, this is more, I don't know, a celebration of someone that's been a mentor to me, even though he's long past. Now, when I was a young person growing up in northern New Brunswick, our, spring, summer, and fall weekends involved many, many activities going outside, playing scrub, softball, different games. But Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling was a big part of our TV watching and our recreational activity because Atlantic Grand Prix, which was kind of the unofficial, I don't know, NWA affiliate in the Maritimes, they would tour at various locations, including Baldoon, Dalhousie, Hamilton, and Northern New Brunswick. And there was three wrestlers that really, really got over with the people and who were our heroes, even though they were anti-heroes. Of course, Leo Burke, the longtime champion of the Federation, the Cuban Assassin, and my friend, or a person that became my friend, I didn't know at the time I would ever become friends with him, the legendary killer Karl Krupp. Now, you're saying to yourself, how does an Acadian journalist from Northern New Brunswick become friends with a Dutch expat who basically changed the way we looked at heels in the East Coast and Japanese wrestling federations, or mostly East Coast and Japanese? Now, George Bomberg, who later became the infamous Killer Karl Krupp after various character changes as a pro wrestler, was actually born in Holland, and he suffered as a child under the Nazi occupation of his home country, and ironically, he took that youth experiences and turned it around and became probably one of the most hated German characters of his era. In response to it, he was playing against type, a very nice gentleman. All the times I met him, he just tremendously good with the people. And this is where it comes in, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to get a little bit of his history, of his championships and these different successes. But when I was a young journalist in 1985 at going to NBCC Woodstock, I used to hang out with my girlfriend at the time at a location called the Bulls Creek Irving, which is now discontinued, and it was a known place where many very good of the tractor trailer drivers would stop and get coffee and get meals. And one day I was there actually in the markdown comic book and magazine section of the place, and my girlfriend was in the front. I looked in the back where the restaurant was, and this was a familiar face. And he looked exactly like Killer Karl Krupp. And I said to myself, do I take a chance and go over and tell him he's been a hero of mine for many years because of he's the great wrestler that we all looked up to. And I went over and I said, excuse me, are you Killer Karl Krupp? He said, hello, how are you? And I couldn't believe it. This legendary guy, when he stood up, he shook my hand. He almost broke my hand in two. And this was the first of various encounters we had over the next few months, because I used to hang out at Bulls Creek quite a bit. We started having more and more friendly conversations, and when he found out I was going to become a journalist, he basically guided me through our conversations that how he applied his background as a survivor of the Holocaust and a survivor of the Second World War in a way to get himself over. See, he was a tractor trailer driver for various companies in his wrestling retirement. He would travel across parts of Canada. I think at the time he was driving for either for Day and Ross or Midland, one of the major companies at the time. And he would always say in that great accent, he said, Jeffrey, he said, what have we learned? He said, the last time we talked. Well, I said, I don't know, George. He said, no, call me KKK. And he said, you got to get over. You must get over. And I said, what do you mean? Well, he said, if you're going to become a journalist, he said, you got to present yourself well. You have to present yourself taking over something that people really want to come back to. And when I got older, I didn't really understand how important those conversations were. For anybody who knows me, it's 36 years I've been a journalist, and Killer Karl Krupp was my mentor, and he really turned me on to the way entertainers like him needed to get over. Now, in my case, I have gotten over. I've had every great success, won many awards, but it all comes down to Killer Karl Krupp, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background why I think he was the most over wrestler of all time. Now, he made his debut as a professional wrestler in 1957, which was sort of like the pre-major NWA era. that he was involved with. Now, the first part of Mr. Momberg's George Momberg's career, his character was called Dutch Momberg. He was not particularly memorable, but sometime around 1970-71, he changed his name to Mad Dog Momberg. But in 1972, which he told me about, he finally hit upon the gimmick that would make him a star or superstar, the character of the evil German killer Karl Krupp. Now, at the time, the Hans Schmidt character was still in the mind, and Fritz von Erich, the German heel gimmick. It was around for about 20 years, from about 1946, 47, 48, to up to in the early 70s, and they were never called Nazis, but it were basically we do the movements in the ring. Again, I said first popularized by Hans Schmidt and carried further by Fritz von Erich, and because he was a late entry in the field, he decided to become extremely over the top. There's no disconnect why he's called himself KKK. Now he had a great look, big man, 6'2", 256 pounds, but some days he would go about 260, 270, 280. Huge man, thick body, and he looked like a German, SS officer. Bulging eyes, shaved head, a short black beard, and a leering grin with the monocle. He was again a cartoonish version, but frightening as all hell. Now he had a riding crop as well, heavy black boots, and a black ring cape, and delivered various ranting promos in kind of a German accent with mangled pronunciation. But when he walked in, especially in the southern territories, Atlantic Grand Prix, Japan, people went nuts. They would threaten him. They would be scared of him. They would basically pretend they were going to attack him. But I mean, he was an imposing guy, and he also did a goose step in the ring. He did like the old Nazi stiff arm salutes, and also used an iron claw, which he called the eye claw, as his finishing move. And everything demanded respect, because if you thought you could make fun of Killer Karl Krupp and try to touch him, like they tried to do with the Cube and other, his various heels. But what was unknown at the time, and he passed on to me, he hated the Nazis, obviously. And he told me he did that as a way of working through the anger he had against the Nazis. And, he mocked him kind of as what's called a Hogan's hero style. But he told me to my face, he said, I hate what you did to my country. And he said, I'm supporting my family, or have supported my family through, putting them through the ringer. It seems kind of weird that a person from Holland would take up a Nazi gimmick, but in wrestling, everything is possible. Now he won many titles over his career, but his big one, of course, was defeating Leo Burke, like I mentioned before, our great Atlantic Grand Prix, for the ESA's North American Heavyweight Champion. Now he also did time in Japan, and actually co-held the NWA International Tag Team Championships twice between February and April of 1973 with Johnny Valentine and with Fritz von Erich and a replacement partner Karl von Steiger. Now he also reached the final rounds of the 74 and 75 New Japan Pro Wrestling World League tournaments, where he lost, of course, to the great Antonio Ioki. Now stateside, he won his first North American big name title in the Texas territory in '73 before moving to Portland in '74, where he feuded with Dutch Savage. And he also appeared in CWF Florida in '75, and he moved on to Dick the Bruiser's WWE in Indiana, and later on he went to Detroit and used the moniker Baron von Krupp. Now in 1980, Krupp came to Memphis, where he eventually joined Jimmy Hart's first family of wrestling and had a massive feud with Jerry Lawler. Now, because he was in Atlantic Canada for a little while, he returned to Atlantic Canada in the 1980s, and he had a memorable run in Atlantic Grand Prix, and he held not only the European title for quite a while. He had big feuds with the great Malumba and Hercules Cortez, but the greatest feud, of course, was with the fans, because the fans that came out, they came out more for actually Killer Karl Krupp in certain areas and Leo Burke, and it was a massive thing to see Killer Karl Krupp coming in these old dirty hockey rinks, and to see the reaction of the crowd, because they wanted to like him, but they really couldn't because he was the reverse Santa Claus. Everyone believed that Killer Karl Krupp was this dirty heel. Eh? His last feud of his career, of course, was with Angela Mosca in the Southern Ontario territories. But by 1983, he was away from Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling. He was uh, he ended his last big run in Fritz von Erich's World Class Championship Wrestling. Now, it it he did come back to Atlantic Promises because again he was working for Midland at the time, and but he later moved to Ontario, and unfortunately he died in Hamilton, Ontario after contracting hepatitis while wrestling in Japan, and some of the effects of that really impacted him. And I think he is the link for everybody in the Maritimes to the old NWA era to the modern WWF because he was more WWF heel just by himself in the Atlantic territory because he developed that heel persona as almost like a way to keep Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling going more than just Leo Burke and the Cuban and Stephen Pettipaw. He was there, if there was four pillars of Emile Dupre's Grand Prix Wrestling, he was the key fourth pillar. When I say pillars, Leo Burke, Pettipaw, well, I mean the Leo Burke family, Pettipaw, the Cuban, and Killer Karl Krupp. He was the foundation of their success. Now, championships and accomplishments just tremendous. Again, those two All Japan Pro Wrestling NWA International Tag Team Championships twice. Atlantic Grand Prix he won four different titles, including the European Championship, the International Championship, and the North American Tag Team Championships. In the NWA Southern Florida territory, he won the title, heavyweight title twice. Continental Wrestling Association, he won the Tag Team Championship once. Eastern Sports won the Heavyweight Championship three times. NWA Big Time Wrestling, he was Brass Knuckle Champion. NWA Western State Sports, again Brass Knuckles Champion. Pacific Northwest, he won a Tag Team Championships with Kirk Von Steiger. World Championship Wrestling in Australia, he won a Tag Team Championship with Butcher Brannigan. And a World Wrestling Council, he was North American Championship once. But he didn't need to hold a title because he was so over in so many different ways. Again, a top 100 heel in the history of wrestling, maybe top 50. But what he meant to the children of Grand Prix Wrestling, to the teens of Grand Prix Wrestling, the adults, the seniors, he was our wrestler. He was the guy that say, hey, Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling, we have one of the best heels in the business. It became not hated anymore, but beloved. We loved to hate him. We hated to love him sometimes, but we did love him. But I've heard different people. His connections with children. He would basically play the part for these young children. But behind the scenes, many people thought that he went above and beyond to keep Atlantic Grand Prix in focus. And without Killer Karl Krupp, the Grand Prix fans wouldn't come out. If KKK was on the poster, it was guaranteed sales. Everybody wanted to see him because, again, he was larger than life. He was the reverse Superman. He was so over. And you got to understand there was veterans that fought against the Nazis and people that survived the Nazis. And he saw him in the ring, and he was like a pure Nazi. It was like they're getting out their vitriol or basically getting out their anger by hating him. But deep down, he knew that Killer Karl Krupp was just playing a character. I don't know if any person that went to a Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling event, or, I can only say for the wrestlers here, that really, really hated him because they were in on the joke. It's like he was a reverse Santa Claus. Now, I'm very fortunate. I belong to a couple of Facebook sites, Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling and the KKK or Killer Karl Krupp site. This podcast is for the supporters. They've been good to me in the past. Have been checked out our podcast. But if anybody wants to motivate other people to look at a pure documentary on Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling, especially the Leo Burke, Killer Karl Krupp, Cuban, Stephen Pettipas, Great Malumba, Sweet Daddy CK era. I think that somebody should do that because they meant so much to us, especially from the 70s and the early 80s. The TV show on Saturdays, the tours, the announcers, the feuds. I mean, we had no WWF connections back in the day. Very few NWA connections. There was some AWA connections with Ricky Martel, but that's about it. They were our world when it came to wrestling. They were our TV heroes. And at the time, the Maritimes were struggling to gain focus as to what their entertainment was going to be, and everybody wanted to be at Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling. Brothers, sisters, families, everybody went out. It was like the circus coming to town, and it was a circus. Let me tell you, some of the feuds and matches were very intense. So on this Friday and at the Canterbury home office, we wish you the best of luck. But all I can say is that KKK has been dead for a number of years now. I miss him every day. We're very fortunate. A lot of the Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling heroes are still alive, but having George not around, it's kind of sad because he left to mourn some great members of his family, some great supporters, and there's many times where I see WWE, TNA, ROH, New Japan. I see almost like I can see the ghosts of KKK around the ring, saying, you must get over. And I think that sums it up. You can't do anything in life without getting over, which means getting over. Make yourself undisposable. Make yourself, that they can't ignore you, they can't get rid of you. And no one can ignore me, ladies and gentlemen. You're talking to the governor, because the governor knows how to get over. How in the hell, ladies and gentlemen, did a journalist ever come from the community of Rock Vegas? 45 people, where half of Lorne and Northern New Brunswick thought we were stupid. It wouldn't get anywhere. I got over, ladies and gentlemen. And once you get over, you cannot not ignore me. If there was a wrestling character called the Governor, ladies and gentlemen, I am the Governor. I've gotten over, whether you like it or not. Too bad, so sad. If you don't like it, buzz off. I was trained by the best to get over. I might be kayfabe, we might not. We don't know, do we? Have a good evening. Bye.